Imagine walking across a barren, sun-scorched desert and unearthing a skull so massive, so bizarre, that it defies every law of biology you thought you knew. What if the red dust beneath your feet held the crushed, fossilized bones of a half-ton beast equipped with a beak powerful enough to shatter solid bone? How does a place like this even come into existence? A land completely cut off. A world locked in absolute evolutionary isolation. What happens to life when nature itself transforms into an unforgiving, arid trap? When a landmass drifts away into the ocean, leaving its inhabitants entirely separated from the rest of the planet, evolution stops striving for perfection and starts fighting simply to survive. It creates an ecosystem that functions completely on its own bizarre rules. We are looking at a prehistoric arena where marsupials did not just survive, but mutated into apex predators and multi-ton behemoths that occupied every ecological role. We are looking at cold-blooded reptilian assassins equipped with venomous bites and ancient landscapes where devastating fire was the ultimate force of creation. This was not a normal environment. It was an extreme biological pressure cooker where every animal was pushed to its absolute physical limits just to endure one more season of drought. Why did this isolated land become the most terrifying nightmare fuel ever to exist on Earth? What kind of twisted survival strategies allowed these monsters to rule for tens of millions of years without a single drop of outside competition? And what terrifying new variable finally arrived to bring this invincible empire of giants to its knees? Welcome to Quiet Expeditions. If you are ready to uncover the dark, forgotten chapters of our planet history, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and step with us into the haunting shadows of prehistoric Australia. Imagine a world entirely unrecognizable from the map we know today. Around 45 million years ago, the landmass we now call Australia did not stand alone. It was securely anchored to a colossal supercontinent known as Gondwana, a vast, unbroken territory that once connected Antarctica, South America, and Africa. This was not the barren, sun-baked outback we picture today, but an Earth filled with lush, ancient rainforests and deeply interconnected ecosystems. Life flowed freely across this monumental expanse. Animals could wander across enormous distances under a unified global canopy, sharing genetic material, competing, and evolving without the absolute boundary of impassable oceans. It was a thriving green paradise where the rhythm of survival was dictated by abundance. But the Earth is a restless, shifting entity. Deep beneath the planetary crust, immense thermal forces were churning, preparing to tear this ancient paradise apart. As slow, agonizing tectonic movements began to take hold, a profound and irreversible fracturing commenced. Australia started to gradually break away from its icy southern neighbor, Antarctica, drifting northward at an incredibly sluggish rate of only a few centimeters per year. To any creature living through that era, this movement would have been completely imperceptible. It seemed entirely insignificant, just a microscopic shift beneath their feet. Yet, the true, terrifying power of geology lies in the sheer, unimaginable scale of deep time. When you take a movement of just a few centimeters and stretch it across tens of millions of years, the cumulative effect is nothing short of apocalyptic for the local biology. That creeping, silent separation was enough to pull an entire massive continent away from the global network of life, transforming it into a rogue world completely cut off from the rest of the planet. Australia was embarking on a lonely one-way journey into the unknown void of the ocean. As the continental gap between Australia and Antarctica widened, billions of gallons of seawater rushed into the newly formed abyss. This physical breach allowed for the creation of massive, swirling ocean currents surrounding Antarctica. These violent waters acted as a planetary thermal wall, effectively trapping freezing air and water around the southern pole. Because of this, Antarctica became forever locked in a tomb of ice. Meanwhile, the newly orphaned Australia was being pushed further and further away, propelled relentlessly northward into entirely different, increasingly dry climate zones across the planet. The environmental transformation was as ruthless as it was absolute. The lush, vibrant canopy that had sheltered life for millions of years was now under atmospheric siege. The ancient rainforest that once blanketed the continent from coast to coast could not survive this brutal shift in latitude, and slowly, inevitably disappeared. The damp, shadowy forest floors were forcefully replaced by sparse grasslands, tough scrublands, and vast, merciless deserts that seemed to expand without any end in sight. The entire continent was literally drying out, baking under a new, unforgiving sun. For the animals trapped aboard this drifting landmass, there was absolutely no escape. The oceans surrounding them were too wide, the currents too treacherous to cross. No new species could migrate in to introduce fresh genetic competition, and no existing inhabitants could flee the worsening drought. Australia was forced to function as an entirely closed system for tens of millions of years. It became a biological island, a massive planetary quarantine zone where the standard rules of global evolution no longer applied. Left completely to its own devices, life here had to follow an entirely separate evolutionary path. It was an agonizing transition from a paradise of abundance to a continental prison of scarcity. The environment had mutated into an arid, unstable, and deeply unforgiving realm. In this newly isolated world, nature stopped being a nurturing provider and became a ruthless adjudicator, where the slightest biological inefficiency meant a swift and uncompromising death. To endure this slow-motion catastrophe, the surviving creatures would have to twist their own biology to extremes. The stage was set for a terrifying evolutionary experiment, one completely sealed off from the laws governing the rest of the globe, preparing to forge monsters born out of sheer environmental desperation. As the rogue continent was pushed relentlessly northward, it drifted into increasingly dry climate zones across the planet, initiating a slow-motion ecological apocalypse that would forever alter the trajectory of life on its surface. The towering, vibrant ancient rainforests that once covered the continent in a thick, emerald blanket did not vanish overnight in a single cataclysmic event. Instead, they slowly disappeared over agonizing millions of years, retreating like a dying organism losing its lifeblood. Imagine the psychological and biological terror for the creatures inhabiting those woods. Rivers that had flowed for generations, gradually shrinking into stagnant, muddy pools, while the dense protective canopy fractured, exposing the once damp, shadowy forest floors to a merciless, baking sun. In the wake of this dying green paradise, an entirely new and far more hostile environment took over, ruthlessly replaced by sparse grasslands, jagged scrublands, and immense, blistering deserts that expanded without any apparent end. This creeping desiccation forced Australia to function as a sealed, closed system for tens of millions of years, locking every living creature inside a planetary quarantine. But the disappearance of the life-giving rains was only the visible half of the tragedy. To truly understand why Australia produced such brutal, nightmarish monsters, we have to look far deeper beneath its cracked surface, down into the very dirt that supported this fading world. The true horror of this isolated environment was not just the crippling lack of water, but a foundation of soil so profoundly nutrient-poor that it bordered on the absolute extreme. In thriving ecosystems around the globe, life is sustained by the constant geological recycling of rich, fertile minerals, but Australian soils suffered from severe, suffocating phosphate and nitrate deficiencies. These missing elements are not merely arbitrary chemicals. They are the fundamental biological building blocks of life, the crucial molecular engines that power cellular growth, bone density, and reproductive success. Extensive geochemical studies suggest a shocking reality. The nutrient levels buried in this vast red dirt were significantly lower than those found across any temperate continents on Earth. It was an invisible starvation, a geological famine that fundamentally altered the rules of existence. How does life persist when the very ground beneath its feet is essentially dead? This catastrophic chemical deficit forced all surviving plant life into a near-constant state of maximum energy conservation at the most fundamental biological level. Plants could no longer afford the luxury of producing soft, luscious, nutrient-dense leaves or energy-rich fruits. Doing so would bankrupt their microscopic reserves and guarantee their immediate demise. Instead, the flora had to mutate into tougher, more aggressive forms. It was precisely on this impoverished, starved ground that the ancient eucalyptus forests first emerged to dominate the landscape. These were not welcoming trees offering shelter and easy sustenance to passing herbivores. They were hardened, armored survivors of a dying land, evolving leathery, indigestible foliage packed with complex chemical defenses to prevent the desperate, starving animals from consuming their hard-earned growth. Every single blade of grass, every twisted scrub, and every towering tree became a botanical fortress of minimal nutrition. For the animals trapped in this changing world, the absolute collapse of their traditional food chain meant they had to make an impossible biological choice: adapt to consume the unconsumable or perish entirely. The easy, abundant days of grazing in a prehistoric paradise were permanently over, violently replaced by the relentless pressure of survival inside an arid, unstable, and deeply unforgiving environment. In this twisted arena, evolution was no longer aiming to create perfection or harmony. It only created forms that were sufficient to survive. And in a world where the dirt was dead, the water was vanishing, and the plants were toxic, what it meant to be sufficient to survive was about to take on a very terrifying, monstrous shape. pushing life toward biological extremes that had never been witnessed anywhere else on the planet. The profoundly impoverished ground of this drifting continent did not remain a barren wasteland of red dust. Instead, it gave birth to a very specific, highly weaponized kind of survivor. It was on this nutrient-starved, chemically exhausted dirt that ancient eucalyptus forests began to emerge, spreading their roots through soil that offered almost nothing in return. To endure the punishing, drying climate and protect their incredibly hard-earned foliage from desperate, starving herbivores, these trees evolved a deadly and spectacular biological secret. Within their tough, leathery leaves, they began hoarding highly volatile compounds, carrying oil concentrations that could range from roughly 5% to more than 15% of their total leaf mass in certain species. Imagine walking through a dense, primeval woodland where the canopy above you is quite literally dripping with highly flammable hydrocarbons. On a sweltering prehistoric afternoon, the ambient air itself would have been thick with the sharp, medicinal scent of vaporized eucalyptus oil, turning the entire landscape into a colossal, ticking time bomb, waiting for a single, catastrophic spark. And sparks, in an increasingly arid climate dominated by dry lightning storms, were an absolute inevitability. But these were not localized, easily contained brush fires. Sediment cores extracted from the deep geological past reveal a terrifying reality about the scale of these infernos. Levels of ancient micro-charcoal increased significantly in the soil records, suggesting a brutal shift in the environment where fires not only became far more frequent, but also spread uncontrollably across far larger regions. Furthermore, without massive numbers of giant herbivores constantly eating and regulating the heavy undergrowth, dead leaves, shedding bark, and dry branches simply piled up on the forest floor, creating a continuous, unbroken carpet of explosive tinder. When a fire ignited, it did not merely burn, it detonated, racing across the continent in roaring, apocalyptic firestorms that could consume thousands of acres in a matter of hours, turning the horizon into a wall of blinding orange heat. In any other ecosystem on the planet, a fire of this magnitude would be viewed as an absolute biological apocalypse, an extinction-level event that resets nature back to zero. But prehistoric Australia operated under its own twisted, localized logic. In this isolated world, fire gradually became the dominant, controlling force of the entire ecosystem. It ceased to be merely an agent of random death and destruction. Instead, the astonishing reality was that fire in Australia evolved into one of the fundamental driving forces that actively shaped life itself. Nature did not just surrender to the flames. It learned to harness their terrifying power. To witness the true genius of evolutionary survival, one only needs to look at how the plant life responded to this perpetual holocaust. Many plant species did not just build thicker bark or deeper roots to resist the heat. They adapted directly to these recurring, violent fire cycles, synchronizing their entire existence to the rhythm of the flames. Others took an even more extreme, almost unimaginable evolutionary direction. They evolved in the completely opposite direction, reaching a point where their very survival and continuation as a species entirely depended on being burned alive. Deep within the ash-choked soil, These specialized plants buried seeds encased in incredibly tough, woody shells. These seeds would lie dormant, sometimes for decades, ignoring the sparse rain or the passing of the seasons, waiting in the dark for one specific, violent trigger. Their seeds would only germinate after experiencing the intense thermal shock of extreme heat. When a massive firestorm finally ripped through the canopy, vaporizing the adult trees and scorching the earth, the intense wave of heat would crack those armored shells open. As the smoke cleared and the ash settled, providing a sudden, rich burst of stolen carbon and minerals back into the dead soil, the new generation would finally awaken from its slumber. In this bizarre biological theater, fire became a kind of biological switch, a mandatory catalyst triggering the sudden regeneration of entire ecosystems. Without the devastating infernos, the forests would stagnate, choke on their own debris, and eventually die out. To create fresh, vibrant life, the continent first had to be completely and ruthlessly purged by fire. It was a brutal, beautiful paradox where total annihilation was the absolute prerequisite for resurrection, establishing a merciless environmental rhythm that every breathing creature on the continent now had to navigate. When the roaring walls of flame finally passed and the suffocating blankets of thick, black smoke began to slowly dissipate into the upper atmosphere, the landscape left behind resembled the surface of a dead and alien world. The ground was scorched a deep, unforgiving black, blanketed in a thick layer of fine gray ash that swirled into the air with every gust of the dry wind. The skeletal remains of ancient eucalyptus trees stood like charred monuments to a devastating apocalypse. To a casual observer, this devastated terrain would appear to be a completely sterilized wasteland, devoid of any conceivable sustenance. Yet, beneath the still smoldering earth, the violent thermal shock had already triggered a microscopic revolution, unlocking the heavily armored seeds that had been patiently waiting for this exact catastrophe. Within days, brilliant, emerald green shoots would aggressively push their way through the suffocating layers of charcoal, feeding greedily on the sudden, massive influx of stolen carbon and rare minerals temporarily deposited by the flames. This dramatic, sudden resurrection dictated the daily survival of every creature on the continent. The massive, lumbering herbivores of prehistoric Australia could not afford to stay in the few unburned, safe havens, because the unburned vegetation was too tough, too toxic, and utterly devoid of the precious nutrients required to sustain their massive bulk. Instead, these herbivores were forced to relentlessly adapt to landscapes that were constantly being rebuilt from the ground up, embarking on grueling, dangerous migrations through recently burned terrain specifically to feed on that incredibly rare, highly nutritious, fresh vegetation. They became perpetual nomads of the ash, tracking the ghostly footprints of the firestorms across the shifting continent. But venturing into these open, blackened plains was a terrifying gamble. The fires had consumed all the protective brush, all the tall grasses, and all the shaded canopies that herbivores traditionally relied upon for camouflage and safety. They were completely exposed against the dark earth, their silhouettes visible for miles under the harsh, glaring sun, and they were being watched. The predators of this isolated world were not mindless beasts terrified by the infernos. They were highly calculating deeply opportunistic killers who had learned to master the chaotic rhythms of the flames. Instead of retreating from the heat, these predators learned to brutally exploit the widespread panic and absolute chaos left behind by the fires. They understood that a massive wall of advancing flame acted as a colossal, inescapable net, driving thousands of panicked, exhausted, and smoke-blinded animals ahead of it. The carnivores would position themselves strategically at the edges of the destruction, waiting in the shadows of the few areas spared by the blaze. They began hunting prey that had been forcefully concentrated into the few, shrinking surviving patches of unburned habitat. Imagine the sheer horror of a desperate herd, having just outrun a catastrophic firestorm, lungs burning from the inhalation of toxic smoke, stumbling blindly into a rare oasis of green vegetation, only to realize they had been funneled directly into a perfectly orchestrated ambush. The predators did not need to waste their precious energy chasing prey across the vast, blistering plains. The environment had already done the exhausting work of capturing, corralling, and terrifying the victims for them. This was a dark, symbiotic relationship between the killers and the climate, a tactical choreography of death written by the shifting winds and the dry lightning. When you look at this twisted, interconnected web of survival, a chilling realization begins to take shape. You could perhaps outsmart a lurking predator, or physically outmuscle a rival for a shrinking puddle of muddy water, but you could never outfight the continent itself. Within that entire, inescapable system, the most dangerous, lethal force was not actually any individual predator equipped with razor-sharp claws or bone-crushing jaws, but the environment itself. The environment was the ultimate arbiter of life and death, an uncaring, faceless executioner that could wipe out an entire valley with a single spark, or starve a population by withholding the rains for months on end. Every single biological function, from digestion to locomotion, was heavily taxed by this relentless geological hostility. If you were a creature that required enormous daily quantities of lush food to maintain a high metabolism, or if you needed a completely stable, predictable climate to raise your vulnerable young, prehistoric Australia would actively and aggressively eliminate you from the genetic pool. The traditional blueprints for mammalian success, the ones that had conquered the lush forests of the Americas and the vast plains of Africa, were completely useless here. To conquer a world that was constantly oscillating between devastating droughts and explosive firestorms, biology required a fundamental, radical redesign. It required an animal capable of bending the very rules of reproduction, an animal that could treat its own offspring as a calculated biological wager against an unpredictable climate. Under those incredibly harsh, wildly fluctuating conditions, it was not the familiar placental mammals that claimed the throne, but rather the bizarre, highly specialized marsupials that suddenly became the dominant form of life across the entire continent. But what exactly was their secret weapon? How could an entire lineage of bizarre, pouch-bearing animals manage to conquer an apocalyptic wasteland that would have easily crushed the most fearsome lions and elephants of the outside world? And what dark, incredible biological sacrifices did they have to make to achieve absolute supremacy over this nightmare landscape? Across the sweeping, sun-drenched savannas of Africa or the dense ancient forests of Eurasia, the undisputed rulers of the animal kingdom are the placental mammals. Creatures like towering elephants, incredibly swift horses, and apex predators like lions dominate their respective domains with absolute authority. From a biological perspective, their evolutionary strategy seems entirely flawless and incredibly powerful. To ensure the survival of their bloodline, these placental mammals invest enormous, staggering amounts of physical energy, time, and biological resources into each and every reproductive cycle. A mother elephant, for instance, carries her massive calf inside her womb for nearly 2 years. During this incredibly long and taxing gestation period, her own body acts as a dedicated internal life support system. She must relentlessly consume massive quantities of food and water every single day just to sustain the rapidly growing entity within her, continuously pumping her own blood, vital nutrients, and calcium directly into the developing skeleton of her unborn child. It is an all-or-nothing biological gamble of the highest order. In a relatively stable environment where seasonal rains arrive on a predictable schedule and lush food sources are generally reliable, this massive, exhausting investment pays off brilliantly. It produces a highly developed, robust, and physically capable offspring that can walk, run, and begin learning to survive shortly after taking its very first breath of air. But prehistoric Australia was fundamentally different. It was an erratic, climatic nightmare where the very concept of environmental predictability had been completely and violently erased. Imagine attempting to bring that exact same heavy, resource-draining, placental reproductive strategy into a hostile, isolated landscape where expansive lakes can evaporate into cracked, dead mud within mere weeks, and life-giving water can completely disappear without a single warning. In this sun-scorched, unforgiving arena, food availability does not follow a gentle, predictable, seasonal curve that animals can trust. Instead, it changes rapidly and violently through extreme, chaotic seasonal cycles. Punishing, suffocating droughts can descend upon the land almost overnight and last for agonizing, relentless months at a time, turning the once edible vegetation into dry, highly toxic, and completely indigestible husks. Under these brutally unstable environmental conditions, the placental mammal's greatest evolutionary strength suddenly and terrifyingly transforms into a fatal biological flaw. If a heavily pregnant predator or a grazing giant herbivore is suddenly caught in the middle of a prolonged, unexpected drought, she cannot simply command her body to pause her pregnancy. The rapidly growing, ravenous fetus locked inside her womb continues to mercilessly drain her rapidly diminishing reserves, biologically demanding calories and hydration that simply no longer exist anywhere in the surrounding scorched landscape. The mother becomes trapped in a horrifying, invisible, internal war against her own offspring. Eventually, her weakened body will completely give out from the sheer, agonizing physical exhaustion of trying to miraculously sustain 2 complex lives on absolutely zero incoming resources. In an unstable environment like prehistoric Australia, a single, unexpected drought could easily and swiftly mean absolute, unavoidable death for both the starving mother and her unborn offspring. It is a catastrophic evolutionary dead end, a rigid biological system that simply cannot afford to adapt to sudden, violent atmospheric changes. To conquer a rogue continent that constantly weaponized its own climate against its inhabitants, life desperately required a completely different blueprint, an evolutionary strategy that prioritized extreme biological flexibility over massive, risky initial investments. And that is exactly where the bizarre, seemingly alien marsupials emerged as evolution's completely different, brilliantly unorthodox solution to an impossible problem. They completely abandoned the dangerous high-stakes game of long-term internal gestation that defined the rest of the planet. Instead of committing massive amounts of precious bodily energy to carrying a heavily developed pregnancy for a long, taxing period of time, marsupials adopted a reproductive strategy of staggering, almost ruthless biological efficiency. They evolved the remarkable ability to give birth to incredibly premature babies at an extremely, almost impossibly early stage of physical development. When you try to picture a newborn animal in the wild, you might naturally imagine a wobbly calf struggling to stand, or a blind, mewling puppy seeking warmth. But a newborn marsupial entirely defies all conventional expectations of what constitutes a living, breathing infant. In species like the colossal red kangaroo, an animal scientifically known as Macropus rufus, a creature that will eventually grow massive enough to stand taller than a fully grown human adult, the newborns weigh only a few pathetic, barely measurable grams at the exact moment of their birth. They are unbelievably microscopic, sometimes measuring only a few tiny centimeters long, looking like little more than a fragile, gelatinous pink entity. They enter the harsh, unforgiving outside world with almost no fully developed internal organs. They are completely blind, entirely hairless, and seemingly entirely defenseless against the brutal reality of the Australian environment that waits just beyond their mother's body. Yet, this incredibly fragile, microscopic entity possesses a singular, overwhelmingly powerful biological instinct programmed deep into its undeveloped nervous system. The very second it emerges from the birth canal into the perilous open air, the tiny semi-transparent hatchling immediately begins an epic, grueling vertical climb that defies logic. Using only its surprisingly strong, highly developed microscopic forelimbs, while the entire rest of its tiny body, including its hind legs, is still essentially unformed, it blindly and desperately crawls upward through its mother's thick, coarse fur. It is navigating purely by scent and gravity, embarking on the single most dangerous physical journey of its entire life, when it is biologically barely more than a developing embryo. Its ultimate destination is not the open plains or a hidden den, but a highly specialized external biological adaptation that would come to define the supreme dominance of the entire continent. The tiny hatchling crawls directly into its mother's pouch. This pouch is far more than just a simple, empty pocket of skin dangling on the abdomen. It is a highly complex, heavily protected biological sanctuary, functioning as a kind of mobile survival chamber, perfectly designed by evolution to shield the incredibly vulnerable offspring from the raging heat, the toxic smoke, and the desiccating, bone-dry winds of the outside world. Inside this dark, warm, and tightly controlled microenvironment, the tiny newborn firmly and instantly attaches itself to a specialized milk-producing teat. Once latched on, the teat actually swells inside the infant's mouth, locking the baby securely in place so it cannot accidentally slip or fall out as the mother aggressively bounds across the jagged, unpredictable terrain in search of scarce food. Here, safely hidden away from the deadly, chaotic extremes of the Australian outback, the newborn can safely continue to develop at a steady, measured pace. It is essentially experiencing a highly regulated external pregnancy, growing inside a far more stable, intimately controlled environment. Meanwhile, the mother remains incredibly light, extremely mobile, and physically unburdened by a heavy internal pregnancy, allowing her to sprint away from predators or migrate vast distances to find water without the massive physical handicap of a fully grown fetus inside her belly. This bizarre, extraordinary mechanism was the ultimate evolutionary cheat code, a brilliant way to cheat death in a dying world. But it was just the beginning of the terrifying, masterful ways these creatures would learn to manipulate their own biology to conquer the nightmare continent. Inside the warm, hidden confines of the mother's pouch, the microscopic, fragile newborn does not merely hide from the scorching sun. It actively engages in a highly regulated, gradual development process, perfectly synchronized with the violently fluctuating conditions of the unpredictable outside world. To a casual observer, the pouch might seem like a simple carrying bag, but a deeper biological examination reveals something fundamentally staggering. What is even more remarkable is that this specialized anatomical system is not simply a passive method of raising young. It functions as a highly sophisticated, real-time biological regulation mechanism, an evolutionary supercomputer assessing the environment and making instant calculations about life and death. Imagine the physical toll of living in a landscape where an unexpected shift in wind patterns can vaporize lakes, turning a thriving oasis into a graveyard of cracked mud and bleached bones. In any normal biological framework, an animal that is pregnant during such a catastrophic collapse is doomed, dragged down by the inescapable metabolic demands of the growing fetus inside her. But the marsupials of prehistoric Australia possessed a hidden superpower, a genetic trick so bizarre and effective that it borders on the realm of science fiction. Many marsupial species evolved the astonishing capability to temporarily pause embryonic development the exact moment that environmental conditions became unfavorable. They possessed a literal, biological pause button. To truly grasp the magnitude of this adaptation, you must visualize what happens on a microscopic, cellular level when the Australian outback decides to turn hostile. When the blistering summer months drag on without a single drop of rain, the water holes turn into toxic sludge, and the nutrient-poor vegetation shrivels into dry, indigestible husks. As the mother marsupial begins to desperately scour the barren landscape for the absolute bare minimum calories required to keep her own heart beating, her body detects the severe environmental stress. Chemical signals, driven by the drastic drop in her nutritional intake and hydration levels, flood her internal systems, specifically during these brutal periods of water or food scarcity. Instead of allowing a newly fertilized embryo to continue dividing, growing, and demanding precious resources that she simply does not possess, her body actively halts the cellular division. The tiny cluster of cells, known as a blastocyst, floating within her reproductive tract, completely stops developing. It does not die, and it does not grow. It enters a state of suspended animation, perfectly preserved in a microscopic cryogenic sleep, waiting silently in the dark. The mother essentially freezes time. This allows her to direct every single ounce of her rapidly depleting energy exclusively toward her own immediate survival, completely unburdened by the parasitic drain of a developing pregnancy. Furthermore, if the drought reaches apocalyptic proportions, pushing the mother to the absolute brink of starvation, many of these creatures can take this extreme regulation a step further, even delaying or completely reabsorbing embryos into their own bodies during periods of intense drought or absolute food scarcity. The mother's body cannibalizes the paused embryo to reclaim its trace nutrients, making a cold, calculated biological decision to sacrifice the unborn in order to save the vessel that might one day reproduce again. This phenomenal ability is an extraordinarily rare form of reproductive coordination within the broader animal kingdom, perfectly designed to solve the ultimate problem of the Australian environment, allowing them to completely avoid wasting precious, finite resources on offspring that are statistically unlikely to survive. It is a system built purely on pragmatic survival mathematics. Why invest months of energy building a body that will just be born into a desert with absolutely nothing to eat? Why commit to a pregnancy when the sky refuses to rain? The placental mammals of other continents play a dangerous game of biological roulette, betting everything on the hope that the weather will hold. The marsupials of Australia simply refuse to play the game until they know they have already won. They wait. They endure the dust storms. They navigate the raging fire cycles, and they survive on the absolute minimum, carrying their paused, microscopic future generations within them. And then, eventually, the chaotic climate shifts once more. Dark, heavy clouds gather over the scorched plains, and the torrential rains finally fall, striking the dead earth and instantly awakening the dormant, fire-scarred seeds buried in the ash. Within days, the barren landscape explodes into a sea of temporary, vibrant green. The moment the mother consumes this sudden abundance of fresh, water-rich vegetation, her internal chemical alarms switch off. The stress hormones dissipate, and a new biological signal is sent into the dark. Once external conditions improve, the cellular suspension is broken, and development instantly resumes. The embryo wakes up from its stasis, begins dividing again, and the cycle of life continues as if the brutal, multi-year drought had never even happened. When viewed from a grand, evolutionary perspective, this remarkable capability became the ultimate survival first reproduction strategy. It was a completely revolutionary approach to sustaining a species, a form of reproduction that aggressively prioritizes the actual survival potential of the mother over the sheer numbers of offspring produced. Instead of attempting to maximize the number of babies born into a hostile world, hoping a few might get lucky and survive, marsupials meticulously optimize their ability to simply wait for the exact, perfect right moment to reproduce. They synchronize their entire existence with the unpredictable heartbeat of the continent. On an arid, unforgiving landmass where crucial resources fluctuated violently Wildly and completely unpredictably, this temporal control over pregnancy became an overwhelming absolute advantage. It was the definitive key that unlocked the continent for them, shielding them from the catastrophic boom and bust cycles that would have instantly eradicated any other type of mammal. Because they could freeze time, because they could adapt to a world constantly trying to burn or starve them to death. They were no longer just struggling survivors clinging to the edges of the outback. They were preparing to completely take over. With their incredible reproductive flexibility shielding them from the climate's worst tantrums, the marsupials were suddenly free to expand, mutate, and grow into terrifying new forms, claiming territories and ecological thrones that had been left entirely vacant. They were about to step out of the shadows of survival and into the blazing spotlight of prehistoric dominance, transforming from clever survivors into the most colossal, bizarre, and utterly terrifying beasts the world had ever seen. What happens to a biological lineage when it realizes it has absolutely no competition, and an entire massive continent becomes its exclusive evolutionary playground? It was this relentless, unforgiving environmental pressure that allowed the bizarre marsupials to completely dominate nearly every single ecological role across the vast expanse of prehistoric Australia. With absolutely no outside competition from the placental mammals that ruled the rest of the planet, these unique survivors began rapidly expanding into every conceivable biological niche. They were no longer just hiding in the shadows. They became the dominant herbivores, the deep burrowers, the opportunistic scavengers, and the terrifying apex predators of a closed, isolated world. Evolution ran completely wild in this continental laboratory, twisting familiar shapes into unimaginable new forms. Some of these newly evolved species strongly resembled giant, muscular lions, yet they belonged entirely to ancient marsupial lineages, carrying their young in protective pouches. Others looked like gigantic, grotesque rodents, scaled up dramatically by evolution to weigh hundreds of kilograms. Even the familiar, iconic image of the bouncing kangaroo we know today was completely rewritten by the harsh demands of the prehistoric landscape. Certain ancient kangaroos, such as the towering Prehistoric, evolved into upright two-legged walkers possessing massively built bodies, essentially abandoning the energy-draining hopping locomotion entirely to stride across the open terrain with thunderous, heavy steps. It was a biological funhouse mirror, a twisted landscape where creatures shaped exactly like massive rhinoceroses or heavy hippopotamuses roamed the scorched earth. Despite belonging to completely separate and isolated evolutionary branches. And when this unbridled, desperate biological adaptation was pushed to its absolute physical limits, prehistoric Australia witnessed the awe-inspiring rise of the giant marsupials, an era defined by living, breathing biological machines of staggering, monumental proportions. The undisputed king of these terrestrial titans was Diprotodon, also known in scientific circles as Diprotodon, the single largest marsupial ever discovered in the entire history of our planet. To truly comprehend the sheer scale of this colossal beast, you must completely erase any preconceived notions of modern, small-scale Australian wildlife. This was a breathtaking creature that stretched nearly 4 meters long and stood over 1.8 meters tall at the shoulder, casting a massive, intimidating shadow across the baked red earth, weighing anywhere from roughly 2.5 to nearly 5 tons, and in some extraordinary well-fed cases reaching up to 4 tons in mass. It physically rivaled a modern rhinoceros or even a small commercial truck in sheer size and immovable bulk. Moving in massive, unstoppable herds, their collective heavy footsteps would have literally shaken the arid plains as they slowly migrated across the vast, unforgiving landscapes in relentless search of sustenance. Yet, despite its terrifying mountain-like appearance and overwhelming physical presence, this impossible hybrid of a wombat, a hippopotamus, and a rhinoceros was not an aggressive, flesh-eating predator. It was a dedicated, slow-moving herbivore. But to be a successful herbivore in the harsh, silica-choked scrublands of ancient Australia required a digestive system and a mechanical physiology unlike anything seen in the modern world. Diprotodon moved methodically across the arid plains, tasked with consuming a daily diet that would be instantly fatal or completely indigestible to almost any modern grazing animal. The vegetation blanketing this nutrient-poor, fire-scarred continent was heavily armored, bone-dry, and packed with abrasive silica, essentially turning the tough plants into biological sandpaper. Most modern grazing animals, like horses or cattle, would completely struggle to digest this tough vegetation efficiently, their teeth rapidly wearing down to the sensitive nerves before they could ever extract enough calories to simply survive. Diprotodon, however, was perfectly engineered by millions of years of hardship for this exact nightmare diet. The fossilized structure of its massive teeth reveals extreme levels of mechanical wear, perfectly consistent with a long lifetime of aggressively chewing the dry, nutrient-poor plants that absolutely dominated the ancient landscapes of Australia. Its mouth was an industrial-scale, biological grinding machine built for endurance. But its seemingly peaceful grazing appearance was incredibly deceptive, hiding a terrifying potential for violence. If this multi-ton giant was ever cornered by a predator or threatened by a rival, the immense, thickly muscled structure of its heavy rear jaw could generate explosive bite forces reaching nearly 11,000 newtons of pressure. To put that terrifying, abstract mathematical figure into practical, horrifying terms, the jaws of this slow-moving grazing herbivore possessed the sheer kinetic power to completely crush a human femur bone as easily and effortlessly as you or I would snap a brittle cracker in half. It was a living, breathing tank, heavily armored by its own massive bulk and equipped with hydraulic-like jaws that could pulverize solid bone, all simply to process dry leaves. When viewed in the proper ecological context of prehistoric Australia, the age of these giant marsupials did not just represent a simple, linear phase of increasing biological body size. It represented a desperate, extreme leap taken by an entire interconnected ecosystem, a world where life itself was pushed toward its absolute physical limits, just to extract a few fleeting drops of energy from the dying dirt. But the mighty, bone-crushing Diprotodon was not the only bizarre giant wandering heavily through the ancient, open forests and scrublands. Among the towering, oil-rich eucalyptus trees, another completely bizarre shape moved carefully through the dappled shadows, representing an entirely independent evolutionary solution to the exact same brutal problem of prehistoric survival. This was Palorchestes, a creature so strangely constructed and difficult to classify that its fossilized bones completely baffled early scientific researchers. When anatomists first unearthed its remains, they initially mistook it for a close, ancient relative of the tapir. This immense scientific confusion stemmed directly from its highly unusual, elongated skull structure and its radically enlarged nasal bones. These specific, highly modified anatomical features strongly suggested the possible, undeniable presence of a highly flexible, muscular, small, elephant-like trunk extending from its face. It seemed like a bizarre, impossible genetic fusion of multiple, unrelated animal groups thrown together by a mad creator. But in biological reality, Palorchestes was a highly specialized leaf-eating marsupial that had evolved along a completely separate and unique path from the giant, truck-sized wombats. Instead of relying on sheer, brute jaw strength to grind up silica-rich grass from the ground, it utilized its highly specialized trunk-equipped head and incredibly powerful, heavily clawed forelimbs to actively pull, aggressively tear, and methodically process tough vegetation high up within the ancient open canopies. It used its immense arms not to hunt fleeing prey, but to violently rip down thick branches and strip away the tough, leathery foliage that other, shorter animals simply could not reach. These titanic herbivores, from the 4-ton, femur-crushing Diprotodon to the strange, trunk-nosed Palorchestes, were the absolute masters of the prehistoric Australian flora. They roamed the landscape like fleshy, unfeeling machines, seemingly impervious to the standard dangers that plagued smaller, weaker creatures. Their immense physical size protected them from sudden heat loss. Their incredible, specialized digestive tracts neutralized the toxic, sharp plants, and their sheer physical mass made them practically immune to the attacks of average, everyday carnivores. They were, in essence, too big to fail. But nature, especially in a tightly closed, heavily isolated arena like this rogue continent, never allows a biological vacuum to exist for long without a violent correction. If an environment manages to consistently produce massive, slow-moving herds of highly nutritious creatures weighing as much as 3 to 4 tons, it will inevitably and rapidly trigger the evolution of something specifically designed to slaughter them. You cannot have massive mountains of meat walking freely across the plains without eventually drawing the intense attention of a highly specialized apex killer. But how exactly does an ecosystem engineer a predator capable of taking down a 4-ton animal, equipped with a jaw that can effortlessly snap a femur? You cannot rely on traditional feline tactics or pack-hunting canine strategies that work elsewhere in the world. You need a monster completely untethered from the normal rules of mammalian biology. You need a creature born from an entirely different, highly twisted evolutionary pathway. A killer so bizarre and so unimaginably violent that its very existence seems like a dark paradox. What terrifying predator could possibly emerge from the shadows to control an empire of indestructible giants? If an isolated, high-pressure ecosystem contains lumbering, armored creatures weighing as much as 3 to 4 tons, the biological mechanism required to control their population cannot be an ordinary predator. It must be an absolute monster, an evolutionary anomaly designed with a singular, terrifying purpose. Deep within the ancient, open forests of the Australian outback, that controlling force emerged as a creature known to science as Thylacoleo carnifex, a beast commonly referred to as the marsupial lion. But this creature was not a lion at all, and its very existence presents an astonishing, almost unbelievable evolutionary paradox that defies the standard rules of biological development. In the rest of the world, apex predators like wolves, tigers, and true lions belong to an ancient, continuous lineage of carnivorous mammals, inheriting millions of years of specialized meat-eating genetics. Thylacoleo, however, did not evolve from a traditional lineage of carnivorous mammals. The terrifying reality hidden within its fossilized bones is that this hyper-lethal killer actually originated from a branch of peaceful, herbivorous marsupials. It is the product of an entirely different, highly twisted evolutionary pathway, where a lineage of harmless, plant-eating animals had been violently molded by the extreme environment into the ultimate terrestrial predator. To understand how a herbivore transforms into a nightmare, we have to look closely at the architecture of its skull, which harbors one of the strangest secrets in paleontology. Its brain was remarkably small, a biological trait it directly inherited from its distant, slow-moving relatives, the koalas. In almost any other predatory species, a small brain would be a massive disadvantage when trying to outsmart agile prey. But in the ruthless calculus of prehistoric Australia, this lack of brain volume was not a weakness. It was a masterful architectural compromise. That significantly smaller brain created crucial, additional empty space within the dense bone of the skull itself. Nature immediately repurposed this vacant cranial real estate, allowing massively thick, incredibly dense jaw muscles to anchor themselves directly to the bone with extraordinary, unprecedented density. The physical result of this anatomical trade-off was something almost mathematically impossible for a creature of its physical stature. Pound for pound, taking into account its overall body mass, Thylacoleo possessed the single strongest bite force ever recorded among all known mammals. To put this staggering power into perspective, its bite was completely comparable in sheer destructive force to that of a fully grown modern African lion, despite the fact that the African lion weighs nearly 2.5 times more than the ancient marsupial did. It was a compact, heavily muscled engine of pure mechanical destruction. Because it evolved from plant-eating ancestors, it completely lacked the long, conical canine teeth that typical carnivores use to puncture and hold on to struggling prey. But evolution is the ultimate improviser. In evolutionary biology, this transformation represents an extreme form of evolutionary repurposing, a fascinating process occurring when an original biological structure serving a basic, completely different survival function is aggressively modified to create an entirely new, highly specialized function. Instead of long canine teeth, the marsupial lion evolved two massively protruding front incisors, originally used by its ancestors for snipping tough vegetation, but now drastically modified and shaped like sharpened, lethal chisels. Behind these chisels, its premolars were flattened and elongated into terrifying dagger-like blades that functioned exactly like enormous heavy-duty meat shears. When those massively over-engineered jaw muscles contracted, These blade-like teeth did not just puncture flesh. They sheared clean through muscle, tendon, and solid bone in a single, devastating motion. This unique, horrifying dental configuration completely dictated its method of killing. It did not need to run its prey to exhaustion, and it did not need to suffocate victims with a prolonged, exhausting bite to the throat. With a single, explosive strike, it could easily bring down massive prey up to 15 times its own body size in less than a single minute by completely severing the trachea and slicing entirely through the major neck arteries. It was an incredibly efficient, low-energy, maximum-impact execution, perfectly suited for an arid environment where conserving calories was a matter of life and death. But how does a relatively compact predator actually catch a towering giant like a Diprotodon? It could not rely on sheer speed across the open plains. The answer lies in its heavily muscled forelimbs, which were equipped with massive, fully retractable, razor-sharp claws, a feature incredibly rare among marsupials. Fossil evidence deeply analyzed by paleontologists suggests that it utilized a horrifyingly effective ambush strategy. It would deliberately conceal itself high up in the sturdy branches of ancient trees, or wait silently upon elevated rocky terrain before launching sudden, explosive downward attacks directly onto the backs of completely unsuspecting prey passing below. Imagine the sheer terror of walking through a quiet, sun-dappled eucalyptus grove, only to have a heavily armored, chisel-toothed predator drop silently from the canopy, instantly locking its lethal claws into your spine. This was an extraordinarily effective ambush strategy within the increasingly open, heavily arid landscapes of prehistoric Australia, allowing the marsupial lion to completely bypass the physical defenses of the giants. Furthermore, chilling fossil evidence, including deep claw marks etched into ancient stone and crushed cave fossils, strongly suggests that it possessed the immense upper body strength required to drag massive, bloody carcasses vertically up into trees or deep into highly sheltered, elevated areas to feed undisturbed over long periods of time. This critical behavior proves that it did not merely kill prey in a random frenzy. It strategically dominated and entirely controlled the entire hunting space around it, hoarding its kills away from terrestrial scavengers. Thylacoleo carnifex was the absolute pinnacle of marsupial evolution, an unstoppable, tree-dwelling executioner born from the absolute necessity to control an empire of titans. Yet, no matter how terrifying, heavily muscled, or perfectly adapted these warm-blooded mammalian killers became, they were not the only nightmare haunting the Australian outback. Because in this isolated, forgotten corner of the planet, the ancient mammals still had to constantly look over their shoulders, completely aware that they ultimately bowed before the true, cold-blooded horrors that had never actually relinquished their ancient claim to the continent. To truly grasp the absolute horror of this isolated, sun-scorched ecosystem, we must first completely strip away our deep-seated mammalian bias. In the rest of the world, when the colossal asteroid impact wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, it effectively ended the global age of giant reptiles, paving the way for warm-blooded mammals to rise up, conquer the continents, and claim the absolute top of the food chain. But in the deeply isolated, aggressively hostile arenas of prehistoric Australia, the age of reptiles never truly ended. The environment was so relentlessly starved of nutrients, so brutally punished by erratic droughts and explosive firestorms, that the hyper-efficient, energy-hoarding biology of cold-blooded killers remained incredibly advantageous. In Australia, no matter how terrifying, heavily muscled, or perfectly adapted the carnivorous mammals became, they still ultimately bowed before the cold-blooded horrors that continued to rule this continent with absolute, unyielding authority. If you want to understand the terrifying extent of this reptilian dominance, look no further than Quinkana. When you try to imagine a crocodile, your mind instantly conjures a comforting, familiar image. A heavily armored, sluggish ambush predator lurking invisibly beneath the murky surface of a tropical swamp, waiting patiently with only its eyes exposed for a thirsty animal to make a fatal mistake at the water's edge. Now, you must completely and entirely erase that image of a water-bound aquatic reptile. Imagine instead a terrestrial nightmare, a land-dwelling crocodile reaching staggering lengths of up to 6 meters. But this colossal beast did not wait silently beneath the water for its next meal. The immense isolation and the rapidly drying climate of the continent forced this crocodile to abandon the vanishing rivers and take absolute control of the dry, burning earth. To conquer the open plains, Quinkana evolved incredibly long, muscular, fully upright legs positioned directly beneath its heavy body, completely unlike the sprawling, belly-dragging posture of the crocodiles we know today. Furthermore, these towering, powerful limbs terminated in specialized hoof-like toes. This structural, biomechanical revolution allowed the massive creature to lift its heavily armored body high above the dusty, sun-baked ground and sprint with terrifying, remarkable agility directly through the ancient, open woodlands and expansive scrublands. It was a hyper-aggressive pursuit predator, actively charging after fleeing prey across the dry land like a heavily armored, scaly wolf. When it finally caught up to its exhausted, terrified victim, it did not rely on the famous drowning death roll utilized by its aquatic cousins. Instead, Quinkana delivered devastating, explosive bites using uniquely serrated, knife-like teeth that easily and brutally tore away massive, bloody chunks of flesh. Its terrifying biological strategy was to inflict such catastrophic, massive mechanical tissue damage that the victims would rapidly bleed to death on the open plains, completely eliminating the need to ever drag them underwater to finish the kill. Fossil estimates and extensive paleontological analyses suggest it measured roughly 3 to 5 meters in average length, creating a horrifying reality where instead of simply waiting for prey near a shrinking water source, it could actively, relentlessly pursue animals through the ancient woodlands and grasslands, leaving a trail of blood and devastation in its wake. But the sprinting, land-dwelling crocodile was not the only ancient, cold-blooded shadow slithering through the dry brush and towering eucalyptus trees. Sharing this unforgiving, baked landscape was another prehistoric marvel, a creature known as Wanambi. This was a giant, primitive python stretching an imposing, unbelievable 6 to 8 meters long, its sheer physical size alone making it a dominant force in the dense undergrowth. But what made this gigantic serpent truly terrifying was not merely its massive length or its thick, heavily muscled girth. It was its highly unusual, deeply methodical hunting strategy that set it apart from the giant constrictors we recognize in the modern world. Modern pythons possess highly flexible, loosely articulated skulls that allow them to unhinge their jaws and swallow extremely large, heavy prey entirely whole, slowly digesting the massive meal over several weeks. Wonambi, however, possessed a far more primitive, rigid bone structure in its skull and heavily muscled jaws. Based on this specific anatomical limitation, scientists have concluded that Wonambi likely could not swallow extremely large prey whole the way many modern pythons can seamlessly accomplish. But evolution rarely leaves an apex predator without a lethal, highly effective workaround. Instead of swallowing the animal in one massive, exhausting gulp, Wonambi utilized its immense, heavy coils to aggressively constrict the life out of its victim, suffocating it in a terrifying embrace of pure muscle, and then proceeded to violently tear the dead prey apart piece by piece. To the human mind, this might seem like a gruesome, overly complicated, and messy method of feeding. But from the strict, unforgiving perspective of evolutionary biology, this was an absolute masterpiece of survival engineering. Tearing prey apart piece by piece was an incredibly low-energy but extraordinarily efficient predatory system, perfectly suited for severely arid environments. In a harsh, unforgiving landscape where food was desperately scarce and the blazing sun drained precious moisture by the minute, every single attack needed to absolutely maximize the energy gained in return, while minimizing the exhausting metabolic cost of trying to swallow and process a massive intact carcass. A cold-blooded metabolism already requires only a tiny fraction of the daily calories needed by a warm-blooded mammal, meaning a massive, heavily armored snake like Wonambi could eat a single, violently dismantled meal and then disappear into the dark, cool crevices of the earth, waiting silently in a state of low-energy suspension for months until the changing seasons and the pangs of hunger finally drew it out into the light once again. These cold-blooded monarchs, with their terrifying adaptations and absolute mastery of energy conservation, proved that in a land constantly stripped of water and nutrients, sheer biological endurance was the ultimate weapon. But even the sprinting crocodiles and the giant, flesh-tearing pythons were merely the supporting cast in this reptilian theater of death. They were just setting the stage for the true, toxic king of the Australian nightmare. A creature so massive and so inherently lethal that it completely redefined what it meant to be an apex predator on planet Earth. If there is a single creature that completely embodies the absolute peak of prehistoric terror on this isolated continent, a beast standing completely uncontested at the very top of Australia's terrestrial food chain, it is the magnificent and horrifying Megalania. Scientifically classified as Varanus priscus, this colossal, cold-blooded executioner holds the terrifying distinction of being the single largest monitor lizard ever to exist in the entire history of planet Earth. To truly visualize the scale of this reptilian king, you must imagine a heavily armored, low-slung predator that dwarfed the most fearsome modern Komodo dragons. Exhaustive fossil analyses and biomechanical studies suggest that Megalania may have reached staggering lengths stretching between 5.5 to nearly 7 meters long. As it dragged its heavily muscled frame across the baked earth, it carried a massive physical weight of more than 500 kilograms, making it undeniably one of the absolute largest terrestrial predatory reptiles ever known to science. Clad in thick, reinforced scales acting as natural chainmail, and possessing thick, muscular limbs ending in massive, scythe-like claws designed to rip through the dense hide of multi-ton mammals. It looked like a literal dragon stripped of its wings and unleashed upon the arid plains. But sheer physical size and brute mechanical strength were not what made this giant lizard the ultimate inescapable weapon of the prehistoric outback. Megalania possessed a dark, hidden biological secret that completely bypassed the need to overpower its massive prey through sheer physical wrestling. Unlike the swift, mammalian predators of the African savanna, such as cheetahs, these giant reptiles were absolutely not designed for prolonged high-speed chases across the open landscape. A 500-kilogram cold-blooded lizard rapidly exhausts its internal energy reserves if forced to sprint for extended periods under the blistering Australian sun. Instead, Megalania specialized entirely in the dark art of ambush, heavily relying on inflicting catastrophic initial injuries, and then simply exhausting its terrified prey over a prolonged period of time. Its most devastating ultimate weapon was completely invisible from the outside. It lay heavily concealed within the dense, fleshy tissues of its massive lower jaw. Groundbreaking paleontological studies deeply analyzing the structure of its skull proposed that it possessed highly developed venom glands, anatomically very similar to those found within the jaws of the modern Komodo dragon. This horrifying revelation means that a sudden, violent strike from Megalania did not only inflict massive, localized mechanical damage through its deeply serrated teeth, but it also gradually and methodically weakened the fleeing prey through a lethal, systemic cocktail of potent venom and rapidly spreading bacterial infection. The biochemical composition of this reptilian venom was a masterpiece of lethal evolutionary engineering. The venom it violently pumped into the gaping wounds of its victims contained extremely powerful anticoagulants. These specific, highly toxic proteins effectively destroy the blood's natural ability to clot. To execute a successful hunt, this 2-ton giant killer did not need to physically wrestle a thrashing, panic-stricken 4-ton Diprotodon to the bloody ground. Megalania only needed to patiently ambush its unsuspecting prey from the dense brush, deliver a single, devastating, venom-laced bite to a heavy limb or exposed flank, and then simply release its grip and rapidly retreat back into the shadows. The initial wound inflicted by the serrated teeth would immediately begin bleeding uncontrollably. As the terrified, injured mammal desperately sprinted away in a blind panic, its rapidly beating heart would actively work against it, pumping its own precious lifeblood out onto the dusty soil. Over the next few hours, the victim would suffer from aggressively falling blood pressure, overwhelming systemic infection, and eventually, total catastrophic physiological shock. Megalania did not need to run. It simply had to crawl slowly, methodically tracking the thick, unmistakable chemical scent of the bloody trail. Walking deliberately behind the fading, staggering shadow of its collapsing prey, and patiently waiting for the absolute, inevitable death to arrive. It was an agonizing, slow-motion execution, perfectly tailored to an environment where every single calorie of energy expended had to be strictly rationed. Yet, even a practically invincible, venomous giant like Megalania, the sprinting crocodiles, and the heavily muscled marsupial lions all shared one fundamental, inescapable biological vulnerability. If there was one specific, deeply dangerous place where the entire complex ecosystem of prehistoric Australia violently intersected and converged, it was not around a specific, highly abundant food source or a single keystone species, but around the absolute, non-negotiable presence of water itself. And yet, the dark, overarching paradox that governed this dying continent was this. Water here was not only the ultimate source of life, it was also the ultimate inescapable trap. On a vast, sun-scorched continent where the life-giving rainfall in many expansive regions relentlessly remained below roughly 250 millimeters per year, the landscape was trapped in a state of perpetual thirst. When the brutal dry season arrived, and periods passed for agonizing weeks or even unbroken months without a single drop of rain falling from the cloudless, glaring sky, the expansive lakes and flowing rivers rapidly evaporated into cracked, lifeless mud. As the moisture vanished from the earth, every single breathing creature, regardless of its size, its armor, or its lethal venom, was violently forced to migrate and move toward the absolute last, few remaining shrinking water sources. But that desperate localized convergence created a brutal, terrifying ecological paradox that defies normal biological logic. The more desperately life depended on securing a drink of water, the more everything was helplessly drawn into the exact same, highly concentrated location. Imagine standing at the edge of a rapidly shrinking muddy water hole deep within the heart of the ancient outback. The shimmering heat waves distort the horizon, and the air is thick with the metallic scent of blood and dry dust. Surrounding this tiny, precious oasis are the massive, deeply imprinted tracks of giant, lumbering creatures, such as the massive Diprotodon weighing nearly 4 tons, their heavy bodies desperate for hydration. You would see immense herds of towering Prehistoric, the giant short-faced kangaroos standing over 2 meters tall, moving slowly and cautiously across the barren landscape toward the muddy banks. But when all terrestrial life converged upon this single geographical point, the entire interconnected food chain inevitably converged right alongside it, instantly transforming the surrounding area into an extreme, highly volatile biological hotspot. In this hyper-concentrated arena of desperation, the normal rules of the hunt completely dissolved. There, the apex predators no longer needed to actively search the vast, empty plains for their prey. The prey, driven completely mad by an agonizing thirst, voluntarily and helplessly came directly to them. The long-legged, sprinting Quinkana crocodile could completely conceal its heavily armored body within the deep, dry mud or the thick, dead brush right at the water's edge, silently waiting for the perfect, explosive moment to launch a devastating strike. Even the terrifying tree-dwelling marsupial predators like Thylacoleo could utilize the elevated ground and the few remaining ancient trees surrounding the water to completely oversee the entire chaotic survival arena below, carefully and methodically selecting the exact perfect moment to drop down upon a vulnerable victim. But what made the shrinking waterhole truly terrifying was not merely the heavy, oppressive presence of dozens of hyperlethal predators lurking in the shadows. It was the physical environment itself rapidly transforming into a toxic, decaying system that actively supported mass death. As the severe, prolonged droughts continually intensified, pulling the water levels lower and lower by the hour, the actual quality of the remaining water deteriorated rapidly. The liquid turned into a thick, putrid sludge. Dissolved minerals trapped within the shrinking pool became increasingly, dangerously concentrated, turning the water highly saline and toxic to the kidneys. Surrounding the mud were the decaying, rotting carcasses of the animals that had arrived too late or had been violently slaughtered by the waiting predators, their massive bodies completely fueling an explosive, deadly bacterial growth within the water itself. In some extreme cases, within the deepest layers of the sludge, highly localized, completely toxic anaerobic mud zones may have formed, releasing poisonous gases into the stagnant air. To simply take a drink was to risk fatal infection or chemical poisoning. And if the predators, the venom, the exhaustion, and the toxic water were not enough, the unpredictable continent possessed one final apocalyptic mechanism to ensure complete devastation. At the exact same time the animals were trapped by their thirst, massive roaring wildfires could easily begin closing in around the surrounding area, ignited by dry lightning strikes upon the brittle vegetation. Deep geological evidence drawn from ancient sediment layers suggests that prehistoric Australia frequently experienced massive, catastrophic fire cycles, with towering walls of flames rapidly spreading across hundreds of kilometers under the dry, oppressive heat, violently consuming the oil-rich vegetation, such as the ancient eucalyptus forests. The apocalyptic result completely trapped the desperate animals at the waterhole between two absolutely insurmountable extremes: the rapidly dwindling, highly toxic water on one side, and the aggressively advancing, inescapable wall of fire on the other, effectively turning the entire geographic region into a perfectly sealed, inescapable survival pressure system. Ecologists studying this brutal prehistoric phenomenon describe it as water stress ecology, the grim, unyielding ecology of extreme water pressure. But in the nightmarish reality of prehistoric Australia, it became far more than just environmental pressure. It became the fundamental, underlying organizing principle of the entire vast ecosystem. Every single biological food chain, from the towering giant herbivores to the venomous reptilian predators, was helplessly drawn toward the exact same location at the exact same time, creating an environment of maximum lethal biological interaction density. And within a highly volatile, completely enclosed system like that, premature death was no longer just a random, unlucky occurrence. It became a strict, unavoidable law of mathematical probability. The closer a thirsty creature moved toward the false promise of water, the exponentially greater the risk of violent death became, until life and death were separated by only a single, trembling step into the mud. When we step back to view the entire horrifying picture of this isolated continent, a much deeper, darker truth emerges from the dust. In prehistoric Australia, the waterhole was never a place of salvation or relief. It was an active, brutal survival filter designed by nature to ruthlessly eliminate the weak. And within that perfectly designed lethal system, nature itself did not even need to hunt. For tens of millions of years, the isolated, drifting continent of prehistoric Australia was completely ruled by the strict, unforgiving laws of biology and geology, where giant marsupials and venomous reptiles fought a relentless, unending war against the punishing climate. But the absolute dominance of these terrifying, highly specialized monsters was not destined to last forever. Around 65,000 years ago, a shadow fell across the coastlines of the ancient, expanded landmass known to geologists as Sahul, marking the arrival of an entirely new, unprecedented variable that this ecosystem had never encountered before: the ancestors of humanity. When you look at the physical attributes of these early human arrivals, their presence on this nightmare continent seems like a biological, mathematical error. Compared to the towering, 4-ton bulk of the Diprotodon, or the heavily armored, bone-crushing jaws of the marsupial lion, these newly arrived hominids were astonishingly small, incredibly fragile, and seemingly entirely defenseless. They did not possess heavily muscled limbs for crushing prey. They lacked the thick, scaly armor necessary to deflect lethal blows. They had no venom glands hidden within their jaws, and they could not sprint fast enough to outrun the giant, pursuit-driven crocodiles hunting on the open plains. By every known traditional metric of prehistoric survival, this fragile, fleshy species should have been immediately and violently eradicated, serving as nothing more than a temporary, exotic meal for the undisputed terrors already ruling this land. But what truly mattered was not that these early humans were physically stronger, heavier, or faster than the apex predators waiting for them in the dark brush. It was the horrifyingly effective, invisible weapon they carried with them, a weapon born not from bone and muscle, but from an unprecedented evolutionary leap that this closed ecosystem had absolutely never faced before: the sheer, unmatched power of human intelligence combined with the deliberate, calculated use of fire. In the rest of the animal kingdom, and particularly in the harsh, unpredictable Australian outback, survival had always been a strictly reactive process. For millions of years, every single living creature on the continent had been forced to biologically adapt to whatever brutal conditions the environment decided to impose upon them. If the climate turned freezing, animals grew thicker fur. If the plants grew tougher, their teeth evolved to become harder. But the arrival of human ancestors brought an entirely different, revolutionary survival strategy to the shores of Sahul. Instead of merely allowing their bodies to passively adapt to the brutal environment over agonizing millions of years, human beings possess the cognitive ability to actively, aggressively change the physical environment itself to perfectly suit their immediate needs. This conceptual shift from being a helpless subject of nature to becoming an active architect of the landscape was the single most devastating disruption in the history of the continent. As these early human populations began to steadily spread deeper across the vast, arid interior of Australia, they introduced an incredibly powerful, transformative tool that absolutely no other biological species before them had ever possessed the capacity to use on such a massive, ecosystem-wide scale. This technique is known to modern researchers and anthropologists as fire stick farming. To truly understand the devastating impact of this practice, one must distinguish it from the random, chaotic natural wildfires that had always plagued the continent. For eons, the native flora and fauna had evolved alongside massive, apocalyptic firestorms ignited randomly by dry lightning strikes. Infernos that burned uncontrollably until the fuel was exhausted or the rains finally fell. But human fire was fundamentally different. It was the deliberate, highly controlled burning of the natural landscapes, executed with a deep, methodical understanding of the winds, the seasons, and the specific behavior of the vegetation. These early hunters did not set fires to cause mindless destruction. Instead, they walked through the ancient, dense scrublands carrying smoldering embers, intentionally setting small, low-intensity fires to systematically clear away the thick, impenetrable dead underbrush that made travel and hunting nearly impossible. This deliberate application of flame was a masterpiece of ecological engineering. By carefully burning away the suffocating layers of dry, dead leaves and dense thickets, they completely prevented the massive, catastrophic natural wildfires that would otherwise build up and destroy everything in their path. More importantly, this controlled burning triggered an immediate, highly predictable biological response from the deeply buried seeds and roots in the soil. Within days of a human-lit fire, fresh, highly nutritious green shoots would rapidly emerge from the blackened ash. This sudden abundance of soft, vibrant vegetation acted as an irresistible magnetic lure for the massive, roaming herds of giant herbivores. The humans were essentially cultivating the wild landscape, actively farming the continent with fire to predictable herd their massive prey directly into carefully prepared, lethal ambushes. They had completely hacked the biological operating system of the entire continent, turning the most destructive, terrifying force in nature into a highly precise, reliable hunting companion. The geological and botanical consequences of this new, intelligent fire regime were absolutely staggering, permanently altering the visual and biological reality of the continent. Deep archaeological studies and extensive analyses of ancient pollen grains extracted from sediment cores suggest a rapid, monumental transformation. Within only a few thousand years after these human ancestors successfully arrived and established their presence, the foundational vegetation patterns had already shifted dramatically across enormous continental regions. The dense ancient forests that had managed to survive the drying climate for millions of years were aggressively burned back, rapidly transformed into vast open savannas and expansive grassy plains that offered no place for the heavy, slow-moving megafauna to hide. Under the deliberate stewardship of human hunters, the natural fire cycles became significantly shorter and far more frequent, completely disrupting the ancient rhythm of the ecosystem. The towering eucalyptus trees and the specific tough shrubs that the multi-ton giants like Diprotodon heavily relied upon for their daily sustenance simply could not regenerate fast enough to survive this new, relentless cycle of targeted burning. As the actual physical structure of the flora was violently rewritten by human hands, the deeply specialized, delicate balance that had sustained the giant biological machines began to catastrophically unravel. The magnificent, towering species that had remained incredibly stable and heavily dominant throughout more than 2 million years of the turbulent Pleistocene epoch suddenly found their world collapsing around them, and they vanished within a roughly narrow window of only 10,000 to 20,000 years. In the grand, sweeping scale of deep evolutionary history, a timeline of 20,000 years is a mere blink of an eye, an almost instantaneous vanishing act. It is crucial to understand that these terrifying monsters, from the massive bone-crushing herbivores to the venomous, cold-blooded reptiles, did not simply vanish because they had suddenly become biologically weaker, slower, or genetically flawed. They were ultimately vanquished because the incredibly fragile, highly specific equilibrium system that had successfully sustained them for millions of years was violently and simultaneously disrupted by a lethal combination of natural climate shifts, altered fire cycles, and relentless human activity. The introduction of a single, highly intelligent species wielding the power of controlled flame acted as the ultimate catalyst, igniting an unstoppable chain reaction that was about to permanently drag the age of the Australian Titans into the absolute, silent darkness of extinction, leaving behind an irrevocably shattered world. As the magnificent, lumbering megafauna began to vanish into the permanent shadows of extinction, the vast ecosystem itself began a terrifying, unstoppable process of structural reorganization. If we look at the entire, complex story of extinction across ancient Australia, the very first and most crucial thing to understand is that this event was never simply about a few isolated species quietly disappearing into the night. In harsh reality, it was a continental-scale restructuring of the entire, interconnected ecosystem. During the turbulent period of the late Pleistocene, roughly spanning between 50,000 and 20,000 years ago, deep fossil evidence clearly suggests that an astonishingly massive figure of more than 85% of Australia's large animals, weighing over 44 kilograms, permanently vanished within a relatively short geological window. When an ecosystem loses its largest inhabitants, it does not just become slightly emptier, it fundamentally breaks. And most importantly, the absolute first major impact of this mass die-off did not actually occur among the surviving predator populations, but deep within the foundational plant systems themselves. When the massive biological bulldozers, like the giant mega-herbivore Diprotodon, creatures weighing roughly 2.5 to 3.5 tons, finally disappeared from the sun-scorched plains, the continent simultaneously lost its critical, natural biomass consumption system. For millions of years, these colossal beasts had acted as the ultimate landscapers, aggressively crushing, chewing, and digesting thousands of tons of tough vegetation every single day. Without their constant, heavy grazing, the dry, leathery leaves and brittle branches simply began to pile up, creating an unbroken ocean of explosive fuel across the continent. This tragic biological loss marked the violent beginning of an unstoppable chain reaction that would eventually completely reshape the entire physical continent. Data meticulously extracted from ancient, deeply buried charcoal sediment cores reveals a major, terrifying shift in the overall wildfire frequency immediately following the sudden disappearance of the megafauna. The microscopic levels of ancient charcoal increased significantly in the geological record, strongly suggesting that the deadly fires not only became far more frequent, but also spread violently across far larger, unbroken regions of the landmass. Without the massive, heavy herbivores constantly trampling and regulating the dense vegetation, fire gradually and ruthlessly became the absolute dominant controlling force of the entire ecosystem. The flames no longer just reset the landscape, they aggressively conquered it. The next, even more devastating effect slowly emerged as a long-term, invisible accumulation of smaller, localized climate reactions. As the protective vegetation cover rapidly declined due to the constant burning, and the roaring wildfires continually intensified, the fragile ancient soils completely lost much of their natural ability to retain precious water and essential organic carbon. The ground itself began to bake and crack, turning into lifeless dust. This devastating, self-perpetuating process represents exactly what modern ecologists describe as an ecosystem feedback loop. It is a terrifying, self-amplifying cycle in which the sudden disappearance of living, breathing organisms directly triggers massive physical environmental changes, and those newly altered, hostile environments continue aggressively limiting the ability of life to ever recover. Under this immense pressure, plant life rapidly shifted toward highly specialized species that were far better adapted to endure the extreme, unrelenting drought. But tragically, these plants were also inherently far more flammable. Consequently, wildfires became increasingly frequent and exponentially more intense, actively producing the vast, dry, and unforgiving landscapes that stretch across the modern continent today. This is exactly what ecologists describe as an ecosystem cascade, a catastrophic chain reaction in which the tragic disappearance of one specific, foundational group of organisms instantly triggers a massive structural transformation throughout the entire highly complex ecological system. Australia, in this profound and permanent sense, was no longer the exact same ecosystem it had been for millions of years. It had effectively become an entirely new version of itself, completely rebuilt and completely defined through the overwhelming power of absence. What makes this massive continental process especially remarkable to scientists is that it did not actually produce an immediate total biological collapse, but rather a slow, agonizing phase transition. The ecosystem did not just curl up and die. Instead, it forcefully shifted into an entirely different, heavily degraded state, one that was significantly simpler, drastically drier, and containing far less overall living biomass over significantly longer timescales. This chilling scientific reality suggests that the modern Australian outback may not actually be a completely separate, perfectly balanced original ecosystem at all. Rather, it is merely the surviving, heavily battered version left behind after a massive, continent-wide ecological decline. The highly flammable, iconic ancient eucalyptus forests, the vast, punishing semi-arid desert regions, and the overwhelming, widespread dominance of specialized species perfectly adapted to extreme drought all carry the deep, ghostly traces of a lost world that may once have been far more biologically complex and vibrant. And when all of these shattered, fossilized pieces are viewed together in the pale light of modern science, the most striking, terrifying reality is not simply that a few magnificent species permanently disappeared into the dust. The true horror lies in the unstoppable way their disappearance violently propagated through absolutely every single level of the entire ecosystem, aggressively rippling from the giant animals to the plants, into the behavior of the fire, and eventually into the overarching climate itself. It was a complete, uncompromising ecological domino effect, where every collapsing, weakened link violently forced the radical restructuring of the entire planetary system. And in the very end, what makes this ancient story truly unsettling is not just the magnificent past that was permanently lost, but the dark, underlying biological principle hidden deep beneath it. In the uncaring theater of nature, extinction is absolutely not an ending. It is an incredibly powerful, active variable capable of entirely rewriting the physical and biological structure of an entire planet in ways that unfold incredibly slowly, yet quickly become absolutely impossible to ever reverse. This incredible journey back through the deep time of the Earth has revealed a magnificent, awe-inspiring, yet deeply brutal chapter in the grand history of prehistoric Australia. Across tens of millions of years of near-total planetary isolation, evolution on this drifting, sun-scorched continent diverged into a terrifyingly extreme direction, deliberately producing gigantic, bizarre creatures, heavily equipped with some of the most extraordinary biological structures and lethal natural weapons ever witnessed on Earth. The most dangerous land in the history of our world did not end merely with the quiet, tragic extinction of a generation of monsters, but with a powerful, haunting scientific reminder of the absolute limits of biological survival itself. In nature, no matter how physically perfect, heavily armored, or aggressively adapted a creature may seem, it will always remain hopelessly vulnerable to the much larger, invisible planetary forces capable of reshaping an entire world. Thank you for joining Quiet Expeditions on this deep descent into the terrifying shadows of our planet's past. Remember that the ground beneath your feet holds the memories of giants, and the true stories of Earth are always waiting to be unearthed.